Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Bite Size Nutrition Podcast. I'm Gillian, and today we are going to answer a client question. And this is from a client who recognize like, hey, I tend to eat pretty healthily. I don't necessarily have a bunch of cravings for high calorie foods or quote unquote unhealthy foods. But when those foods are around, I struggle to stop eating them. And so basically, she asked me, she was like, what's going on here? Why is it that it's not like I have cravings for fries or chips or cake, but then if I'm around them, it's really hard to not eat these foods? And we are going to answer that question again, or that question today, and we're going to give you a little step to work on. But first, before we jump into sort of the bulk of this episode, I want to ask you this. So, if you've ever felt like you constantly second guess or doubt yourself when it comes to food, if you've ever felt guilty for missing a workout, even if you're exhausted, need a rest day, if you've ever felt like you should be able to do it all, but you struggle to live up to your own expectations, or maybe you felt like you're not even sure if your goals are fully yours or if it's just like what you feel like you're supposed to want. If you've ever felt this way, you do not need more self control. You need more self trust. And in my 5-day free mini course, the Self Trust Starter Kit, that's exactly what I'm going to help you start building. And the Self Trust Starter Kit helps you walk through part of one of the pillars of my coaching method, the Connect method. And it helps you start making choices around food, fitness, and life that feel like they really align with you, like you can really trust them. And I'm so excited to share this with you because it can really change. Someone told me the other day that something I said changed their brain chemistry, and I loved that. But I truly think that this can change the way that you think. And you can get it for free. The link is in the show notes. Go ahead, join in. They're very short, like 5-minute lessons for 5 days, and you'll get a ton out of it. All right, let's jump in. So, a pretty decent amount of the coaching clients I work with share with me that one of the reasons they join coaching is because they feel this like conflict between social life and nutrition goals. And so a lot of the clients I work with feel really anxious eating out because they feel like it's either, okay, I super control everything that I eat and I only eat the healthiest thing, but then I'm like stuck in my head comparing and like looking at other people's plates, or they feel like when they go out to eat, they're just like, well, YOLO, whatever, and they end up overeating. That doesn't feel aligned for them. Or I'll have clients that say that I struggle to focus in social situations because I want to be present, I want to enjoy, but I feel like my brain just can't stop focusing on the food. And I've also had a ton of clients tell me that I want to feel comfortable saying yes to events, to travel, to being spontaneous, but I feel like I just feel guilty afterwards and there's so much stress involved. And one of the things that I work on with coaching clients is helping them find joy and fun in their social lives without food being a stressor. And this question is often a challenge that comes up because clients will say, well, when I'm at home and I'm the one doing the cooking and I'm sort of in control of meal planning, it's not like I'm having crazy cravings for like burgers and fries. But the second that someone is like, hey, here's some fries, it's hard for me to eat them in a way that feels aligned with the kind of person I want to be. So let's talk about what is going on. And often, this is an example of how our food rules can be so sneaky. And sometimes it's that we have this sort of out of sight, out of mind as a nutritional control strategy. And honestly, it can work pretty well. And what happens is our brain sort of like puts these categories on like, this is an at home food, this is like an out food, right? And what happens is that if you don't have a certain food at home, you're kind of like, well, it's out of my, I don't think about it and I don't eat it. But that strategy tends to backfire because the root of that strategy is often a scarcity mindset and it's often a little bit of fear. And I want to let you know it's completely normal to get excited and want to eat a tasty food, even more so when it's a food that you're like, ooh, I don't normally eat this food, right? But I also understand that we want to feel in control around these foods. We want to see these foods and be like, it's just food, right? And we might logically know it's just food, but in the moment, it doesn't necessarily feel like that. It feels like, wait, why is this taking up so much space in my brain? And so there's kind of two things that we need to talk about here: how we respond in the moment when those foods are around, and how we think about food overall. And so we're going to talk sort of overall, and then we're going to drill down into what's going on in the moment. So, as mentioned, the root of this, the root of, well, I don't keep this around or I don't usually eat these foods, is often in scarcity and fear. And I would ask, is it that you genuinely don't want to eat fries or pizza or chips, or have you just structured your life around not eating these foods normally because they're sort of in the bad or unhealthy bucket? There's no right answer here. You might genuinely say, like, hey, I genuinely don't really think about them. Fine, that's cool. And what we really want to look at is, do you have the permission to say, like, yeah, I choose not to eat these foods on a regular basis, but also, like, when they're around, I know that I could theoretically order pizza on a Wednesday or like grab some fries midweek if I wanted to, right? That's where we want to get to. But in order to get there, it requires sort of an overall shift of how you view food and how you make choices. So, for example, do you make choices mainly on what sort of like fits your view of a healthy diet, what fits your macros? Or when you're making choices, do you take into consideration your values and what's important to you? So, for example, if you take into consideration your values, might be like, hey, actually, going out and grabbing a burger with my husband on a Tuesday might actually align with, hey, us connecting and sharing something and being present together, right? And the food becomes sort of part of that experience, not the focus of that experience. And what happens is that when we shift from making choices based on what's healthy or just what fits our diet to what aligns with our values, we can start to see food in less black and white terms. And we start to grow our ability to trust in our personal choice over external rules. And in part, that's because values help us make contextual choices. So instead of saying, like, I never do this or I always do this, you can look at your values and recognize, like, oh, hey, in some scenarios, actually, it really aligns with my values to order the salad. But in some situations, it aligns with my values to stop at and grab a burger on my way home because I really don't have time. It's what's going to fill me up. And it helps me then be able to focus on other things in my life, for example. But also, this shift towards making choices, making contextual choices using our values helps us shift towards abundance, which is this like deep belief and knowing that I can enjoy tasty food when I like. Nothing is off limits. It's not going to disappear. And that is this really deep sense of peace of, I don't need to eat all of this right now because I genuinely know and I trust that I can eat it later. And that is scary. That is scary because it often includes this period of eating those foods more than we think is like, quote unquote, okay. And that feels a little bit terrifying, right? But it's kind of like, if we think about it, it's completely normal. If you don't usually let yourself eat certain foods, you don't usually include certain foods in your diet, you start including those foods, they're really tasty, you eat more of them. But eventually, what happens is our taste buds get habituated to different tastes. And so this doesn't mean that we just replace everything we eat with burgers or pizza, but when we start incorporating those foods more often, the reward value of those foods goes down. And so psychologically, they're less on a pedestal, but also physiologically, we have less of a dopamine response when we're actually used to eating certain foods, right? And as I said, when you use your values as a guide for choices, you can make more contextual decisions, right? That means that eating certain foods in certain scenarios totally makes sense. It might align with celebration, it might align with connection, it might align with family. And what this means in practice is you're not eating whatever you like in all moments, but you're building that deep trust that you can make those choices yourself without relying on external rules. And the problem is we often try to gaslight ourselves into believing that this is true. And here's an example. You're at a party, there's a bunch of chips on the snack table, and maybe you feel like drawn towards the chips and you tell yourself, this is stupid. I shouldn't want them. I can have chips whenever I want. They're not that good, right? And then I would ask you, is that true? You know if it's true or not. You know if it's really true that you can have chips whenever you want, or if it's just something you're telling yourself. And it is possible for it to become true, but it takes showing yourself that it is true, not just saying that it is true. And from there, now let's talk about what happens in the moment. And I want you to think about the last time you were in a situation with those quote unquote unhealthy foods that you couldn't stop eating? Maybe it was like a party, maybe someone brought over a treat. Think about it. Maybe it was at work. And there's three things we're going to specifically think about: what thoughts came up, what your body felt like, and then how you actually ate those foods when you ate them. And so let's talk about thoughts first. So, did you think, wow, that looks good? Immediately, the next thought was, but I shouldn't eat that. Or maybe you thought, like, I'll just have a couple, but I know they're high calorie, so only a little bit, right? And those thoughts might feel like helpful thoughts. You might tell yourself, like, if I think these thoughts, then I will keep myself from overdoing it with these foods. But then we have to ask ourselves, what actually happens when we think these things? Often the urge to eat them increases instead of decreases. And it probably feels harder to stop eating them the more that we tell ourselves, only have a couple, only have a couple, only have a couple. And so we need to start shifting our thoughts away from, I can only have this amount, or I shouldn't eat that. Those are restrictive thoughts, to, I'm going to choose. I'm going to give myself the space to, maybe I have a couple and then I pause and then I figure out, like, do I actually want more? So we do need to work on how we think about these foods if we want to feel calm around them. And then the next part of this is, what did your body feel like? And you might not be aware. Often the clients that I work with are like, I don't really know what my body felt like in the moment. But maybe you are aware, right? You might be aware of, like, oh, okay, I'm tense. My heart is beating a little bit faster. Maybe I feel a little bit hot. You might be aware of those body sensations, but you might not know what to do with it. And a lot of the work that I do with one-on-one coaching clients is, when we work on connecting with your body, part of that is learning to identify, understand, and manage those body signals so that you're working with your body. It's not like, my body's doing this crazy thing and I don't know what's going on, right? But as I said, you might have felt slightly more tense. Maybe your heart was beating a bit stronger. Maybe you're a little bit hot. Maybe you noticed your thoughts racing and it was like hard to focus. And our body signs are really powerful because they tell us a lot about how we interpret a situation or experience. And like I said, when we become more in tune with our body signals, we can respond to them, we can work with them instead of react to them. And specifically, those body signals probably told you that you were feeling threatened. You were having a threat response. You were tense, you were on edge. And sometimes we try to ignore these signals, or we don't even recognize that they need attention. And it means that we end up getting caught up in these, like, racing thoughts. If you notice your body sensations, you can actively take an action to bring yourself to the present moment. So, for example, in coaching, we work on breathing exercises and mindfulness skills so that you can actually respond to your body and bring yourself back into your body so that you can calm those sensations and kind of lower that threat response. So the final question is, when you ate those things, how were you actually eating them? And I will bet that it wasn't slowly, it wasn't mindfully, you weren't savoring it. You were probably distracted. You were maybe distracted by your thoughts. Your thoughts are like, you shouldn't be doing this. Don't keep eating them. You've already had enough. Maybe you ate that thing pretty quickly, and maybe you weren't even registering fully what you were eating. You weren't savoring it. You weren't really noticing the flavors and the textures. And it's not surprising that this is what happens, because if your body is tense, if you're feeling threatened, your mind is racing, you're trying to tell yourself no, how can you truly enjoy a delicious piece of cake or a serving of salty, crunchy fries? It just ends up being this, like, autopilot thing. But when we pay attention, it's common to notice that, ooh, that first bite, that first fry is the most flavorful, the most intense. And as we keep eating, that intensity fades and it reaches a point, sort of like a plateau, where the more you eat, it's not that you're necessarily getting more pleasure out of that food, but we have to be present in order to notice this happening. So let's wrap this up. If you don't normally crave unhealthy food, but when it's around, you feel like it's really hard to stop eating it, this is both a bigger picture issue of how you view food overall and an in the moment issue of how you act when those foods are around. Both of those things, you can change them. The bigger picture challenge, maybe a little bit harder, right? Because what we're going to need to do is, we're actually going to need to understand the thoughts that you have around these foods, the fears, the rules that you've created for yourself. And if you were my client, we would work on reframing them. We would work on intentionally choosing one rule at a time to challenge, to get to a point where you're like, this doesn't feel like a rule that I need anymore because I trust myself. And with the in the moment challenges, I want you to run yourself through the 3 questions I asked. In the last eating scenario you were in that this happened, what thoughts came up? What did your body feel like? And how did you eat these foods when you ate them? What are your answers? When, like, based on what you've heard in this podcast, I want you to choose one thing to start shifting, right? Whether it's calming your body, whether it's responding to your thoughts in a more neutral or more compassionate way, or whether it's eating the cake a bit more slowly next time. Choose one. And I want to also remind you about the self-trust starter kit I mentioned at the beginning of this episode. This mini course will help you make more aligned choices. It will help you trust in your choices more deeply. And when I talked about using values to make choices, that's exactly what you're going to learn in this mini course. So if this episode resonated with you, you are going to get so much out of what is inside the 5 lessons in this course. So go to the show notes and you can sign up for the link. And with that, thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. If you know someone that feels like maybe you're like, hey, they could listen to this today, that would be really helpful. Go ahead and share it with them. Make sure that you are subscribed so you don't miss an episode. And I will see you again here next time.